Sorry about the accent. You might have realised it's a little bit different. If you really want, I can do this in Welsh. Okay. And it's quite a good test to make sure that terminal epilepsy hasn't got a hold of me if I can start speaking in Welsh, because it uses the bit of my brain that acts as sort of the centre of the seizures that I experience and works its way out from there. So if I can't speak in Welsh, os dwi ddim yn gallu siarad yn Cymraeg, then we're on a downer. Okay. So my story. Let's start it as all good stories start. With the way all good stories start. Now, Disney haven't bought this yet, but I'm looking towards it. Okay. It was about 15 years ago when I was working at my desk at work, and the next thing I knew was that I was at home. I had a complete memory loss as to what had happened during the time when I was at work and what had happened in the meantime. Apparently, I'd had a full-blown convulsive seizure, had been taken to hospital and been discharged, and I have no memory of it at all, which is a bit perplexing to say the least. From there on, I was given some prescription drugs, which is a standard practice, not just in the country where I live, but pretty much all over the world. And didn't really believe what I'd been told. However, those drugs didn't really work. I experienced more and more of those convulsive seizures with a growing chance of an Oscar for what I was going through and what I was putting other people through. So I was given yet more and more tests and drugs. The standard one is an EEG scan, where various electrodes are sort of put on your head, and they can tell the different types of electricity that's going through. If you keep having these convulsive seizures, you do dent yourself quite a bit. Okay. And you don't win any beauty contests. We've started going through a long list of different anti-epilepsy drugs at varying sort of concentrations. And every time I had a seizure, then they put up the actual concentration of these different pills. They didn't seem to work, and I had more and more dents and side effects. And an MRI scan did show that the area of my brain that controls language was degenerating. So it got to the stage where the side effects were really getting unbearable, probably more so than the benefits that these pills were supposed to be giving me. In particular, it was the allergies, if you like, the food intolerances that were getting more and more frequent, and I was running out of things I could eat. So I went and explained this to the specialists in the country where I live, up in London, who told me that if I'd stopped taking those pills, I had less than 5 years to live. The other alternative was actually to cut out the bit of my brain which was experiencing these seizures, and it lives sort of just in there, which controls language and memory. I didn't really like the idea of having my brain cut out. I can't imagine why. So after a fairly disturbing interview with those neurologists, with those brain specialists, I announced that I would die my way, and basically felt pretty alone, pretty isolated. That's when I discovered, thanks to an internet connection, that the use of these ketogenic diets not only could be used by children, but also by adults. And one group in particular were bodybuilders, because in particular, they wanted to compete when they didn't carry an awful lot of body fat on them. They wanted people to see the definition of their muscles. So it has to be possible to use that style of eating for other things as well, including the management of the seizures that I was getting, which was anything up to 2 or 3 a day, and basically keep me staying alive, to cue the Bee Gees. So I won't start dancing. I know the name suggests it. So I found a website where bodybuilders in particular talked about their different techniques, and one of them went by the name of DPD 555, which again sounds a bit like the Star Wars story, doesn't it? And I just wanted to know how I could start one of these ketogenic diets without the help of the medical world, without any of the measuring systems that were possible, but at that particular time weren't available to me. So that's when I started getting all sorts of messages from DPD 555 with a different torrent of information as to how these things were possible. Well, guess what? We met up. This was after various suggestions as to how to implement a way of eating rather than the pills or the surgery. And yeah, I tried it. Who wouldn't? The 15th of July in 2008, that's what I started doing. I'm rather pleased that I did, because look, I'm standing here now, 8 years afterwards. It did also involve finding out what was in the food that I was eating, and a whole new approach to shopping by testing what was written in food labels. Also very entertaining because of the effects of being diagnosed with epilepsy. They tend to prevent you from driving. They take your driver's license off you. So trying to find shops that I could actually access by foot, again, was quite an adventure. However, I've now been shown a whole new way of figuring out what was in food, both in terms of looking at the ingredients and also working out how much energy you get from the different macronutrients as well. So at all times, I'm trying to avoid the sugars and reduce the amount of carbohydrate that I eat on a daily basis. Yes, that meant I had to go around all those supermarkets and figure out how much sugar was in food. Food labels are very different as you go across the world. In this country, you're told what's in a serving. In Europe and the UK, they tend to tell you how much is in 100 grams, so it's a percentage. Australia and New Zealand, they take their pick. Okay. So if anything, your general math improves when you've got this to deal with every time you eat. And because of those food intolerances that I sort of showed earlier, in particular to dairy and also wheat, you sort of adopt a new way of eating in a progressive manner. You find out what does work for you and what doesn't. So you become your own guinea pig. And as you can tell from those pictures, I'm afraid that dairy products really were out, which makes life quite difficult on a day-to-day basis in terms of shops that you walk past, in terms of finding anything that is suitable. So yes, not being able to drive doesn't help. Also, when you have intractable seizures, you've got to be quite careful how you cook things. I avoid cooking over an open flame, because if I go face first into that, I'm in trouble. And if I'm eating it as well and keel over, then yes, that makes quite a mess too. It also means that you've got to be fairly careful with your selection of food as well, particularly when you go out with friends or fast food is the only option. You have to get quite used to the proportions of food and things, and also how much you're eating on a day-to-day basis. It can sometimes be very misleading because different manufacturers give very different accounts for what is in food. So I ended up using mail order quite a lot and waiting in for deliveries. I became very reliant on weighing out my own food and writing it down. I do still keep a food diary where I put everything into a spreadsheet, and that happens on a daily basis, just to keep a record so that I can see if there's any major changes going on. And I would provide fantastic graphs of sort of what I've eaten for the last 8 years, but I'm afraid there's too much in there for Excel. But if you want to talk about it, I can do afterwards. What I noticed really happening was those proportions of the different macronutrients were evolving, they were changing from what was considered a fairly healthy proportion of carbohydrates to reducing them as much as I could. And in actual fact, I have a slightly higher protein proportion these days, but please bear in mind that I do exercise usually on a daily basis to try and... Sorry, what was that? Sorry, someone said something. All right, it's the phone, don't worry. Okay, all right, no probs. Yeah, that might be a slightly higher proportion of protein, but please bear in mind I spend most days working out for at least an hour. So it is highly individualized in that respect. What we did notice was a change in the frequency of the seizures I was getting. Yes, they were less frequent when I was using anti-epilepsy drugs, but when I stopped taking those and was using the food alone, then there was a significant decrease in terms of the seizures and the types of seizures that I was experiencing. These days, I'm far more likely to get an absence seizure, which is a bit like the pause button going on, and I don't remember a thing about it. The things that tend to trigger that are stress and lack of sleep. So, pretty much the same as before, but I don't do the full-blown Oscar performance and get carted off to accident and emergency. As I said, this has been going on for about 8 years, And I have noticed some changes, particularly in the overall amount that I'm eating on a daily basis. That has gone down, but it has a similar effect. There is still a significant decrease in the frequency and the intensity of the epileptic seizures that I experience. What I would like to point out is that this change in eating, this change in food, is not as profound as one that I have experienced in the past. My research at university was geological, and once upon a time, long ago, I lived there for 3 months. That's midnight. Okay. And yes, you can see a number of footprints all over the place. As long as they are footprints and not the marks of polar bears, then you're all right. I now realize that polar bears, when they come out of hibernation, are very ketogenic. Right? If I'd only known that then. Right? The crew that went out there assumed, thanks to the medical sort of situation at the time, that everybody had a fairly small calorie requirement. Overall, that they needed pretty much the going rate. Now, please bear in mind we were in tents on a glacier trying to escape polar bears. So that might not have been the best calculation for basal metabolic rate. But you had to figure that out before the helicopter dropped you off with food supply, because Walmart was a long way from there. And no, we didn't have enough to look after ourselves for those 3 months. The effect was me. All right. On the left-hand side, that's when I came back from the Arctic. And yes, I have been using a ketogenic diet for quite some time when the next one was taken. So I wasn't experiencing the loss of muscle mass, but my body wasn't taking protein and turning it into glucose to power the brain in the picture on the right. We were trying to trick it into starvation, but without any of that degeneration that had happened on the ice cap. That way, my body was sort of going along with that ketogenic way to make sure that the brain did run off ketones. I didn't have access to the blood tests or the strip tests that you've heard about in some of the other talks here today and throughout the conference. Some other people got news of this and ended up interviewing me. And in particular, there's a charity called Matthew's Friends who got hold of the story and have been incredibly helpful for me, because they finally got me talking with the British medical system, who were not very happy with the fact that I was not using their pills and wasn't really doing it their way. Now, I'm not pretending that it's all easy living when you've got to figure out what's in the food that you're eating and how much you're eating on a daily basis. Obviously, you've got to make sure you know how much fuel is in it in terms of the fats, the triglycerides. Because, as we all know, the general consensus is that fats are bad for you, and if you have too many of them, you're going to end up with heart disease. There are still remnants of those thoughts going on at the moment. The other problems that I've come across are that people assume that you're going to suffer difficulties with inflammation as well. So trying to convince people to test for that is another adventure, particularly where I live. I was still suffering from those food intolerances that I mentioned earlier. The dairy intolerance in particular is difficult because a lot of the products specifically aimed at ketogenic living are made from dairy products. There are others. As we found out from Mary, this stuff is very useful. It's coconut oil, and I try not to travel without it wherever I go. But getting hold of that in England can be quite an issue because no one's got pine trees there that grow coconuts. I still have some of those food intolerances that we saw earlier. So again, I've got to check for those in terms of the ingredients to whatever I eat. And the other thing that I noticed was endocrine. We saw that a number of endocrine systems weren't really feeding back the way that they had previously. I think the one that is still the most obvious is my thyroid and the way that thyroxine gets manufactured and turned into active thyroxine. That seems to be a process that needs carbohydrate to power it. Now, there are other ways we found out earlier using a different combination of foods. So you've got to go out there and do a bit of research for yourself to find that out. And it also helps to have regular blood tests to see how it's progressing. The other thing that I must mention is that there are psychosocial difficulties as well, particularly if you turn up at special events, at Christmas celebrations or birthday celebrations, and people want you to sort of have what they're all sharing, and you really can't really have the cake or whatever they put in the soup. So you do need to make sure that you take something along just in case there's nothing there that you can eat. So always carry an emergency supply of ketogenic friendly bits and pieces. He says, right, now having said that, after I'd gone through the initial 3 weeks of this changeover, this keto adaptation, we discovered that I can actually go for quite long periods of time without food. This fasting idea can also be utilized. You can have a day of not eating anything, and it's nothing like as harmful as you assume, as people make out. And the best example that I can think of was a visit to Italy, where I'd been asked to sort of give a talk. And at that time of year, the only thing that I could really find to eat was pasta and tomato. And yeah, I know they drink wine as well. Yeah, the grapes were also offered to me. There's nothing I could eat. It's as simple as that. So I didn't. Eek. Luckily, there were people there that convinced me that I would survive. And to prove it, at the end of those 5 days of not eating, we test drove my ability to drive, because please bear in mind my driver's license had been taken away for 4 years, and I flew a plane. So it can't be that bad. Now you never guess who basically confirmed that was going to be all right, and took me weight training as well. But no, that's one of the main adventures of the time. I want to say thank you to him, basically. Without his encouragement, support, and belief in me, I would have carried on taking those anti-epilepsy pills. And the last time I came across a person with a similar condition, they were walking around on crutches and were really finding mobility a huge problem. Now, they trained up to be a gym instructor, funnily enough. I can't imagine where they found the guinea pig for the exam to demonstrate that they were okay as a gym instructor, because that's one of the things I used to do. But yeah, they are now they're now trained as a gym instructor and helping other people with disabilities. So yeah, again, the benefit of this knowledge is sort of working out like ripples on a pond, and long may that continue. I also wanted to say thank you to a charity in Britain and now in Canada and New Zealand as well, called Matthew's Friends, who have been extremely helpful in terms of getting myself and the National Health Service, where I come from, to actually talk to each other. They still don't like the fact that I'm not taking their prescribed route, but at least we are talking. Come on. Which we weren't doing for some time. So hopefully it's that connection, that communication that's going to improve over the next 5 years. And I'm going to continue. It's as simple as that, because it seems to be working for me, despite the difficulty of finding the particular ingredients as you walk around unable to drive. But I'd much rather face that than the future that was prescribed for me 8 years ago. So long may that continue, and long may all of you continue to inspire other people with conditions out there. Thank you. And thank him. Come on then, folks. Are there any questions? It's gone very quiet.
What's the longest you've ever gone fasting?
The longest I've gone is 7 days. Again, that was part of a dare by by a medical professional, and I was at a training course out of town. So yeah, I did 7 days without food, and I didn't experience all of the this sort of side effects that you normally get when your blood sugar levels really drop. What seemed to have happened was I plateaued in a sort of dynamic, metastable equilibrium throughout those 7 days. Your body seems to adapt and adopt, say, a hibernation approach, where you can carry on without eating for some time. So yeah, 7. I think this lady is first, but then I will answer you. Okay.
Do you fast as part of your normal routine, and if so, what, you must drink some liquids? Or?
I do drink some liquids. one of the other strange things about me is that I've never really drunk tea or coffee. So I don't really use caffeine very much. So I'm used to drinking just plain water. And yeah, I do occasionally fast, depending on what food I can get hold of, and if there are any rail transport, public transport strikes going on, or if I'm doing a long haul airline flight as well. It tends to help in those situations, but I'd say once a month I'll involve an all-day fast. This gentleman is...
Point of clarification, one of your slides said on a very low-carb diet, you had to watch for inflammatory markers.
Yeah.
But we've been told, and a lot of research says ketones actually improve inflammation. So could you comment on that?
Initially, I wasn't sort of told that, and the medical profession in the UK assumed I was experiencing a very separate illness and gave me medications to reduce that. In particular, my eyes. There's a type of inflammation called iritis or uveitis, and I was given separate eye drops to take very frequently, and a number of separate events as well suggested that yes, I was suffering with that inflammation. It's a fine-tuned balancing act done on an individual scale, and please bear in mind, when you can't drive, you have to walk everywhere as well. So I incorporate exercise as part of that control of the inflammatory response, basically. Not everybody gets that opportunity, so they'd have to find something that works for them specifically. So I wouldn't say follow everything that I do. Look at the individual to begin with and see what works with them.
How long are you fully off medication, and how long have you been off?
Yes. Now, I got told off.
Time from ketogenic diet too, because I'm sure you have to take some time to.
Yes, you're right. No, you are quite right. You don't just stop them one day and start the diet the next. It's a progressive decline, which I did in 2-week stages of sort of reducing the dosage by 50% in my case. So initially, I was taking quite a lot, and then one by one, they were sort of reduced gradually, and that took a good 3 or 4 months, from what I remember. And yeah, there were side effects to that. I used a system that is also incorporated in people that are addicted to other things, and just saw if that would work with me. I think that sort of went along with the "fine, I'll die my way" announcement after I'd met Dr. Death. But yeah, I found Dr. Life at the same time. Not everybody gets that lucky. All right.
When's the sorry?
That's all right. Please.
When's the last time you had a seizure?
There's different types. Okay. The frequency and the intensity have altered. I'm not too good with stress, and I'm not too good with lack of sleep. So I'm afraid I had an absence seizure today. And I can't remember that at all. With the full-blown tonic-clonic Oscar-winning performances, I tend to know about that because I end up with a really bitten tongue and dents all over the place. The last one of those that I experienced was a couple of weeks back. And again, I came round in a hospital and had to argue my way out of some of the things that were being put into me, which is why I try to make sure I wear a warning to say, no, don't put glucose in him or down him, and other anti-epilepsy remedies in or up me, because that's going to really change the way that the metabolism works. So yes, to be able to argue that point to a host of hospital staff is a sure sign that I'm doing better than before. When I really was knocked out for a day or so, desperately needing sleep and finding it difficult to remember how to talk, because again, it's that bit of the brain that seems to be the center of those seizures. That's where they tend to start. It's going to be different in different people. So yeah, prior to that, it was a good 18 to 20 months, which is very different.
I was going to ask that you answered the last thing you said, which was prior to 2 weeks ago, was the last time you said.
Oh yeah, it was a good 18 months. The last one, again, I know it was triggered by stress. I was waiting to go up to give a talk at another meeting. The chap sat next to me had a seizure, the same type that I get. And he basically fell into my lap and continued to have one of those tonic-clonic convulsive seizures. So I sort of did the first aid, and if that does happen, please make sure that someone grabs those and use anything for a pillow, be it a jacket, a shirt, a towel, whatever, just to make sure that the person experiencing the seizure doesn't bash their head too much on the floor. Unfortunately, that particular chap went straight into the next seizure and the next, and the last thing I remember of that experience was the paramedics taking him on a stretcher out to A&E, to the emergency department. I found out later he died. It's the same thing that I've experienced, the same type of seizure. So, if anything, I wanted to say thank you to the medics and the scientific staff that believe you can use food to stay alive. That's what I'm doing. Not yet, but if you can find one that's not derived from dairy products, then yes, I'll happily test drive that. It's a bit like swapping over from a car that's powered by gasoline to one that runs off diesel. It takes a little bit of time for it to get used to it. But no, I'll quite happily test drive that, particularly on a plane. It's easy to transport. And it's not liquid, so they're more likely to let you carry that as hand luggage. Okay. Anything else? It's gone quiet. Can I please say thank you to him? Thank you. When's lunch?